52 BC. Julius Caesar is trapped at Alesia, surrounded on one side by tens of thousands of Gallic warriors, and from the other by tens of thousands more closing in behind him. Every instinct says charge. Instead, he orders his men to dig. 2 rings of trenches, walls, and towers, built while under attack. It shouldn't have worked. It's one of the most decisive victories in Roman history. That decision captures something Rome did for centuries that rarely gets talked about. It never treated winning as the finish line. The empire wasn't built on one grand victory. It was built on a repeatable system for breaking problems apart, locking down every gain, and turning each win into an asset that made the next one easier. 7 of those strategies still work exactly the same way today. 1. Divide and conquer. For years, Rome's conquest of Gaul worked because Gaul wasn't really one enemy. It was dozens of separate tribes, and Caesar treated them that way, forming alliances, exploiting old rivalries, and, according to his own writings, personally pressuring allied chieftains like Diviciacus to keep enemy forces from combining into a single army he'd have to face all at once. Rome rarely fought a united opponent when it could fight a scattered one. There's a reason this works on brains, not just battlefields. Psychologist John Sweller's cognitive load theory shows that working memory can only hold a handful of items before it overloads. And when a problem arrives as a tangled coalition instead of one clear task, the brain doesn't calmly prioritize. It stalls. That's the mechanism behind the classic New Year's resolution collapse. Someone tries to fix their sleep, diet, and finances simultaneously, and the sheer number of moving pieces triggers paralysis instead of progress. Splitting a complex goal into one solvable front at a time isn't a productivity trick. It's how you keep your own prefrontal cortex from doing to you what Caesar did to Gaul. But here's the twist historians will tell you the popular version usually skips. Division didn't actually win the war. In 52 BC, a young chieftain named Vercingetorix did what no one had managed before. He united the fractured tribes into one coalition, and Rome still won. Not by dividing them this time, but by trapping them behind 2 walls and refusing to let the wind slip away, which means the next skill mattered even more than the first. 2. The Castra principle. Here's a detail that surprises most people. A Roman army on the march built a full fortified camp from scratch every single night. Trenches, ramparts, a wooden palisade, even if nothing was hunting them, even if they'd tear it all down again by morning. Historians estimate it took a few hours. The layout was so standardized that a soldier could find his tent in a camp he'd never seen before, in total darkness, just by knowing his unit. That habit reveals something practical about how humans actually sustain change. Every non-routine action costs willpower, and willpower isn't unlimited on any given day. This is well established even though some of the sharpest early experiments on the topic have had trouble replicating cleanly, which is itself an important scientific lesson. Extraordinary claims need repeatable evidence. What is well supported is simpler. Repetition moves a behavior out of effortful conscious control and into automatic habit circuitry, at which point it costs you almost nothing to maintain. Build one habit until it's boring and automatic before adding the next, and you're not being overly cautious. You're refusing to expand before the current gain can stand on its own. The exact same principle behind a nightly fortress that mostly never got attacked. That's how Rome protected a win. But protecting it and multiplying it turned out to be 2 different skills. 3. The Appian engine. In 312 BC, Rome was fighting the Samnites for control of Campania, a region anchored by its ally, the city of Capua. Instead of just marching troops down and back whenever a threat appeared, the censor Appius Claudius Caecus began paving a permanent road connecting Rome directly to it, the Via Appia. It didn't just secure one campaign, it became the fastest route south for every campaign, every trade caravan, and every messenger that came after it, for centuries. That's the real distinction between defending a win and investing it. Philosophers Andy Clark and David Chalmers proposed something called the extended mind thesis, that tools genuinely reliable enough to lean on, such as a notebook, a map, and a well-worn road, function as an extension of your own thinking, not just an aid to it. A road isn't just concrete. It's stored effort, spent once, and withdrawn from forever after. That's what a well-built template, a documented process, or a searchable archive of past work actually is. Not busy work, but infrastructure that means you never have to solve the same problem twice. Rome didn't just build outward, though. It learned at brutal cost that what you're carrying can matter more than where you're going. 4. The Impedimenta check. In 9 AD, 3 Roman legions under Publius Quinctilius Varus marched into the Teutoburg forest and were annihilated by Germanic tribes led by Arminius, a commander Rome itself had trained. It's often remembered simply as an ambush. The fuller picture is worse. The column was strung out for miles, weighed down by a heavy baggage train the Romans called the Impedimenta, moving through unfamiliar terrain on the word of an ally who was secretly the architect of the trap. The very supplies meant to sustain the army instead pinned it in place while it was cut apart piece by piece. Psychologist Stephen Hobful's conservation of resources theory describes exactly this dynamic in modern life. Stress and burnout don't strike randomly. They strike when your core resources, energy, focus, sleep, support, are already stretched thin, and something demands more than you have left to give. Ambition that outpaces its own supply lines doesn't fail dramatically. It fails quietly, the way an overloaded column falls behind its own scouts. Before chasing bigger output, it's worth asking what's actually fueling the current pace, and whether that fuel can survive being asked for more. Rome learned to protect its supply lines. It also learned to remove the need to think about almost everything else. 5. The Contubernium template. According to the historian Polybius, Roman camps weren't just standardized in general shape. They were standardized down to where each 8-man tent group, the Contubernium, was positioned relative to every other unit. The layout barely changed from camp to camp, legion to legion, decade to decade. Soldiers didn't have to think about where anything went. They just already knew. This is the default effect in action, centuries before anyone had a name for it. Researchers Eric Johnson and Daniel Goldstein famously showed that something as significant as organ donation rates shifts dramatically based purely on which option is pre-selected. Not because people are lazy, but because every decision, however small, draws down a limited pool of daily judgment. Standardizing the small, repeated choices in your own life, a fixed file system, a default morning routine, a checklist for anything done more than twice, isn't about being rigid. It's about spending your best mental energy on the few decisions that are actually hard, instead of burning it on the ones that shouldn't require a decision at all. By this point, Rome had a system that could win, hold, and multiply almost anything. The last question was how to keep that system sharp when there was nothing left to fight. 6. Bloodless battles. There's a famous line usually credited to the military writer Vigetius, that Roman training was so realistic, their drills were bloodless battles and their battles were bloody drills. Here's the correction worth making on camera. That line isn't from Vigetius at all. It's from Flavius Josephus, a 1st century historian who watched the Roman army in action against his own people and wrote it as an outside observer, centuries before Vigetius was even born. Even historians repeat the wrong attribution constantly. During peacetime, legions didn't relax. They drilled, repaired roads, and rebuilt fortifications, treating calm periods as the time to maintain readiness, not pause it. There's a real biological reason this matters. Under acute stress, cortisol narrows access to the brain's complex reasoning centers and pushes behavior toward whatever pathway is already familiar. If a skill or a system was never rehearsed while things were calm, a crisis is the worst possible moment to try building it for the first time. Preventative maintenance on your health, your relationships, your finances, done during the boring, low-stakes stretches is what makes the high-stakes moments feel almost anticlimactic when they finally arrive. There was one final piece Rome never tried to build alone. 7. The auxiliary advantage. Rome's legions were extraordinary at disciplined infantry combat and remarkably bad at almost everything else, so Rome stopped pretending otherwise. It recruited Numidian horsemen. Famous for riding without saddles into cavalry skirmishes the legions couldn't manage alone. It hired Balearic slingers, prized as some of the deadliest skirmishers in the ancient Mediterranean. It even adopted its most iconic weapon, the gladius, from the Celtiberian tribes of Spain, after seeing firsthand how devastating their short stabbing swords were in close combat. Rome's core strength was never total self-sufficiency. It was knowing exactly what it didn't do well and refusing to let that gap slow anything down. Psychologists Leonid Rosenblit and Frank Keel documented something called the illusion of explanatory depth. People consistently believe they understand complex systems far better than they actually do, right up until they're asked to explain one in detail. Trying to personally master every skill a big goal requires runs straight into that illusion and quietly caps how far the goal can go. Rome scaled by integrating outside strength instead of manufacturing it from scratch, and that principle hasn't aged a day. None of these 7 ideas were really about Rome. Fortresses rot, roads crack, and every empire this thorough eventually falls anyway. Rome's did centuries later, for reasons this system alone couldn't prevent. What these strategies actually describe is something smaller and more permanent than an empire. How a limited, distractible, exhaustible human mind can still build something enormous, one secured, standardized, unglamorous win at a time. The trenches at Alesia are gone. The habit of digging them again tomorrow never really left.